College football season is here, so I figured I'd make a prediction video for the SEC, the most exciting and most powerful conference in college football. What I'm going to do is to predict the top 3 teams in the East and West and what teams are going to make it into the SEC championship. And ultimately, the team that wins the SEC championship, I believe, will be the number 1 seed in the 2014 college football playoffs. The only other team that I could see that would be the number 1 seed over any SEC teams would be Florida State. So we're going to start off with the SEC East. And when you start off with the East, you have to start with South Carolina. Most people have South Carolina winning the East, but I'd have to disagree. Because for South Carolina to win, it means their offense is going to have to do a whole lot, especially with Dylan Thompson. And I just don't see it happening because I don't know if he is as good as Connor Shaw was. But if they plan on winning and winning enough to get to an SEC championship, he's going to have to do a whole lot better than Connor Shaw ever did. And with their schedule the way that it is, I just don't see that it happens. And what he's going to have to do is make his presence known at the first game when they play against Texas A&M and show just how good he is. Now, the second team in the SEC East I'm going to go with is Georgia because I think they have a solid team. They got Todd Gurley back again this year, and I think that they're going to end up doing a whole lot better than South Carolina. And their schedule is not quite as tough as South Carolina, so I think they're going to end up ultimately with more wins than South Carolina. And to round out the top 3 for the East, I would have to say Mizzou, just because there aren't really that many good teams in the SEC East, even though you got people like Skip Bayless trying to say that this is the year for Vanderbilt. And I just don't see Vandy going and beating a South Carolina or a Georgia or even being up there in comparison with them. Now, the toughest games for South Carolina are going to be Texas A&M, Georgia, Auburn, and Clemson. Georgia's toughest games are going to be Clemson, South Carolina, Missouri, and Auburn. Missouri's toughest games will be South Carolina, Georgia, and Texas A&M. I think these games are going to be key to figuring out who wins the East. And I'll go as far as to say that I believe that South Carolina loses to Texas A&M by 3. They lose to Georgia by 6. The best case scenario for each of the top 3 SEC East teams. If you look at South Carolina's schedule, you can make a case for them being a 11-1 or a 10-2 season. And I'm just basing this off the 12 scheduled games that there are. So I can see South Carolina coming out 10-2 with a great season, but that means defense has to do a whole lot because I don't see Dylan Thompson putting up production numbers that even match Connor Shaw's. The worst case scenario for South Carolina would be absolutely terrible, and it just ends up being a throwaway season, which very well could happen. Georgia is a similar case to South Carolina. You could see them being 10-2, but their worst case scenario is not nearly as bad because they don't face teams that are as tough as what South Carolina has. And last, Missouri is going to have to prove that they have a solid offense because most everybody knows Mizzou about defense, and the best I can see them doing is going 9-3. But in the end, I have Georgia winning the SEC East with only 2 losses, 1 at Clemson and 1 at Auburn. Now, the SEC West. The top 3 teams for the West is tough to decide because there are so many good teams in the West. I think you have to start off with Alabama. The Tide just had one of the best recruiting years in college football history, and they have 2 really good quarterbacks that they can use, which is Jacob Coker and Blake Sims. This could be a great year for Alabama. I could see them bouncing back from that terrible Iron Bowl last year and trying to redeem themselves to being one of the best college football teams around. Next, you have to go to Auburn. They have a great dual threat quarterback coming back, and they have the possibility of challenging the Tide for the number 1 spot. But with their quarterback missing 1 game, I think that ends up being a loss for Auburn and could ultimately cost them the number 1 spot in the West. And now the team that I think that could shock everybody would be LSU. I could see them jumping over Auburn to get the number 2 spot and even challenging Alabama for the number 1 spot because they have a pretty good team. Now, starting with Alabama again, their toughest games are going to be against Texas A&M, LSU, and Auburn. Now, the toughest games for Auburn are going to be against LSU, Texas A&M, and Alabama. Now, you can see how LSU can play a role having to face both Alabama and Auburn. They can ultimately be a trap game for both of these teams. Now, LSU's toughest games of the year are going to be against Wisconsin, Auburn, Alabama, and Texas A&M. Now, LSU facing Wisconsin, I think that could spell a loss for LSU, but they are a tough team, and I think it's going to come down to the wire on that one. Now, here we go. The top 3 teams for the East and West. As you can see, I think that Georgia is going to come out on top with the East at a 10-2 record, and South Carolina is going to fall just short by losing to Clemson, and Missouri is going to bring up the last spot. In the number 1 spot, Alabama, who goes undefeated this year and gets ultimate redemption for the Iron Bowl last year. In second place, you got Auburn losing 2 games, including the 1 game that their quarterback misses. And we've got LSU coming in third place in the SEC West with a 10-2 record. And here is a prediction for what could be the deciding factor on the number 1 playoff seed this year, the SEC Championship, Alabama versus Georgia. And I ultimately think Alabama beats Georgia and goes on to the number 1 seed in the 2014 college football playoffs. If you agree, like this video. If you disagree, leave a comment and tell me why you disagree. Comment with your favorite team and I'll break down their schedule. Now that Madden 15 has been released, I'm going to start running simulations for the 2014 NFL season and ultimately who is going to win the Super Bowl. If you disagree with my predictions here, leave a comment and tell me why you disagree with them.